Good morning, my fellow yogic travelers. I'm mighty glad to be alive today, and I hope that you are too. And we continue our fourth lesson this week on Hinduism and its connection to yoga. And of course, as we know, all these stories represent what Joseph Campbell would call the masks of God. Some masks reveal and some masks conceal. So there may be some clarity in what I have to share with you, and there may be a lot of still confusion and muddiness. But in our attempt to bring cosmos or order out of chaos, here we go. I think that the reductionistic critique that we would have of the Eastern philosophy is that they're in a mood of renunciation, of world renunciation. And the idea is to identify not with the changes in the world and the illusion or the apparitional way that it presents itself, which is called Maya, comes from the same word that we get to measure. And if it's truly one infinite swinging energy system that can't be pulled apart except by nomenclature and description, but in fact it's just one thing appearing as many, then they want you to identify with the principle that stays still, that's never moving. Isn't that like the Greeks, the unmoved mover? We could call it God, but of course that conjures up a lot of images. And I think what they're really talking about when they talk about Brahman, which I will get to at the end of our talk, has to do with that which is beyond the concepts, beyond the images. The God defined is a God confined. It's not in any words. It's not in anything we can depict. We can't limit it in any way. We can't touch it with our words. It's not soiled by the tongue. It is the one who is alone and there is no second. That's why they say offering God second place is offering God no place, since God is everything. Nonetheless, in the East, a general critique we can make is that the individual doesn't have as much importance. The role of the individual is subsumed within their caste. And you know, when you're born in a caste system, there's no mobility. If you're born a sweet streeper, you're a sweet streeper your whole life. If you're born in the upper elite classes, you're there for your whole life. You do that from 9 to 5, but from 5 to 9, you're still that. Not like in the Western society where you have a persona, there's a social role that you play, but you play it only from the time while you're interacting with the society. So from 9 to 5, you could be a street sweeper, but from 5 to 9, you're anybody, whoever you want to be, because the mobility is not based on the caste, mobility is based on the economics of your society. And of course, it reaches, I think, its apogee in the Zen tradition or the Japanese tradition, where the community is so important. You live so close with other people that you have to be involved in some way, but at the same time, you have to add spontaneity to your social pattern. So everything seems to be aligned with the greater group, but in the same way, you have to react to it in a way where, like, your freedom shows through, that your perfection shows through. Now, of course, the great critiques that we have about Eastern philosophy is that they're interested in talking about a metaphysical principle of which there's no evidence whatsoever. Right? They assert certain kinds of what they say facts, but there's no evidence whatsoever to prove that. So we would say it's in the realm of faith, whereas they would say our realm of science is totally materialistic, that the exploration we do is only about the things on the material plane, because those are the things that we can measure and make certain comments on that seem to make sense. But of course, if it oversteps its boundaries, now it's going into metaphysics. And our physics doesn't really talk about metaphysics. Once we're talking about what's out there and beyond, we're talking about astronomy. Okay. So that's the first thing we have to look at. Now, of course, there's great fear to enter into the unconscious, to that which we don't know, that which is below the surface of consciousness. And remember, for the Eastern tradition, to depotentiate your ego, to get out of the way so that we find that there are deeper layers, deeper substratums of who we are, bedrocks that support us, the foundation from which what we see on the surface exists. But the idea of egolessness, right, or ego loss, doesn't make as much sense to the West, since we are in the cult of ego. We develop the ego. We don't think of the ego and its desires as solely bad, as they might in the Eastern tradition. We see it as the potential of something that's never existed before on earth, land, or sea. And so we want to give it a chance to develop its unique dharma and not think that its desire is bad, but could be a new innovation, something creative. Nonetheless, Mahatma Gandhi is the person who I want to honor today. Oh, by the way, let me go back. My first teacher, Yogi Bhajan, he used to have this little riff. He used to say, there are two ways to spirit. One is expansion of ego to universal ego, and one is annihilation of ego into total self-effacement. And he told me that your path is not the one of annihilation of ego. It's expansion of ego to universal ego. So I think that tips my hand right there. But I want to share things with you from Mahatma Gandhi, because he really represents a yogi who in some way lived a life of renunciation and simplicity, but in another way he was totally active in politics and his historical moment in helping to bring about the independence of India. So here's some beautiful quotes that he has and his little comment on each quote. So I don't mind reading this, didn't memorize this. 1, change yourself. You must change the world. You must be the change you want to see in the world. As human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world, that is the myth of the atomic age, as in being able to remake ourselves. Number 2, you are in control. Nobody can hurt you without your permission. Number 3, forgive and let it go. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. 4, without action, you aren't going anywhere. An ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. 5, take care of this moment. I do not want to foresee the future. I am concerned with taking care of the present. God has given me no control over the moment following. 6, everyone is human. I claim to be a simple individual liable to err like any other fellow mortal. I own, however, that I have humility enough to confess my error and to retrace my steps. It is unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom. It is healthy to be remodeled and reminded that the strongest might weaken and the wisest might err. 7, persist. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. 8, see the good in people and help them. I look only to the good qualities of humans. Not being faultless myself, I won't presume to probe into the faults of others. A human becomes great exactly in the degree to which they work for the welfare of their fellow human being. I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people. 9, be congruent, be authentic, be your true self. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Always aim at complete harmony in thought and word and deed. Always aim at purifying your thoughts and everything will be well. 10, continue to grow and evolve. Constant development is the law of life, and a person who is always true to maintain their dogmas in order to appear consistent drives themselves into a false position. So, wise words, but notice how grounded in ethics it is and consideration, concern for other human beings. So, remember, he got a lot of his original teachings from having been a lawyer in South Africa, where he was really offended by the apartheid that he saw there, and also influenced by the prophets of Israel and how important he felt they were in whistleblowing and calling out the kings and potentates of their time when they were doing unjust practices and not really respecting the path of spirituality. All right, so that leads us to the final thing I want to share for today, which has to do with Upanishadic teaching. As you know, the ancient Indians had the Vedas, which means knowledge, and Vedanta, the end of knowledge. This was all that you needed to know. And for a couple of thousand years, they held sway with the priests chanting the liturgy in Sanskrit, which the common person did not know, in the same way that the Catholic priests were chanting their liturgy in Latin, which the common person didn't know until the Bible got translated into the vernacular. So at some point, the Upanishadic teachings, the great metaphysical teachings of these individual gurus who moved away from the organized religious tradition, or they're certain kind of caromed off of the Vedas, But these were people who claimed to have the revelation or the realization within themselves. Like it said, Jesus came as one teaching with authority, not like the scribes, not people who just could talk about the scriptures but didn't have the actual experience themselves. They were alive, on fire, filled with spirit. And of course, they talked about the glory and the radiance of life and the joy of the universe, and how pristine the world must have been 5,000 years ago before there was any industry or pollution to mar its beauty and glory. And of course, they had stories, because the Upanishads meant sitting up close next to your teacher, getting the ear whispered teachings. The old techniques were taught by sutras, very short, terse statements that the guru would give you the oral commentary. Sitting up close, you would hear the wisdom of the teacher, who was supposed to be an embodiment. So it went from the priestcraft, being the people who propitiated the deities in order to have your sacrifice given to the gods and the goddesses. Then it moved to the Upanishads, with individual figures claiming to be the embodiment of the living spirit, and then telling you that it's possible for you to do that also. Later on, it moves into the Yoga Sutras, where they actually give you the techniques and lay out the whole yogic path. And then it comes kind of into the culmination of the Bhagavad Gita, where it's a complete devotional offering to God in whatever form. All right? So to that end, I want to read you a little story from the Chandogya Upanishad, because it really points out the whole idea about the mystery of existence. And remember, the first point of mythology is to put you in touch with the Mysterium, the thing that's out there that seems to be the source of everything, and nobody even knows what it is. And all things we say are choices of mistakes. So it can't be said, and then anything you say about it is kind of a mistake. And then so that's why we'd use images or symbols, because they're adult toys, right? And symbolism is the mother tongue of humanity. Every culture has its own way of using its imagination to try to wink at it. We never get it, but we play with it like kids play with toys. So this is from the Chandogya Upanishad, just a minute or two. So I'll read it here. Once there lived a boy